friggin' hate these new cups. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thought I was having a stroke there for a second. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Little House Live. So you should. Day 25. Furby, would you go out and come back in, please? Oh, no. That was an accident. I'm having one of those days, folks. There you go. So, can you please go out and come back in, Furby? Thank you. Hi. How's everybody doing? Welcome to Little House Live Day 25. And today we're reading Little House in the Prairie, Chapter 2, Crossing the Creek. Now, excuse me. Now, remember, folks, this book, the actual book, Little House on the Prairie, is mostly fiction. It is fictionalized accounts of stories that she's heard. When they were in actual Indian territory, Laura was only 18 months old. All right. Hi. Let me say hi to everybody.
Gracie, now you want to say hi? What do you want? Some here. Oh, say hi, everybody. Say hi, everybody. Oh, my baby. She's been good. She went for a ride in the car with Mommy today to the drugstore to take Briar lunch. And she helped me fold laundry and water the plants. She's been taking very good care of Mommy. If she could only run the dishwasher. Right? Can I forget? All right. Ooh, there you go. All right, go.
Excuse me. This is actually kind of cute because in this chapter, if you remember, we discussed, let me say hi. Ahmed, Alex, Furby, Jean Phillips, Jean Milne, GV, Joe Mama, Lori M, Marie Dunn, Pam Robertson, Patricia Carson, hey, Johnny, Simwa, Tammy Lester, and Willie. Now, let me put this back on live chat. Now, interestingly enough, we discussed this when I read from last week. This book is complete fiction, almost complete fiction, just drawing on stories that she heard growing up about what happened on the trip to and from Indian Territory. A lot of the travel that is described in here was them going to Minnesota from, it's going to be confusing a little bit because Little House in the Big Woods, and that goes straight from Little House in the Big Woods to Plum Creek, on the banks of Plum Creek, because this is fiction. And if you remember when we were talking about last week when they were leaving to go to Indian Territory, how they, that's why these books are confusing, because a lot of it is stories from Laura's life and a lot of it is fiction. And you just got to know which. If you remember when they left Little House in the Big Woods, they left their dog, Wolf, behind. So Little House on the Prairie and Little House on and on the banks of Plum Creek, Jack is not actually there. All right? I'm just saying that because this gets to be very emotional, right? Hey, Ginger Gargoyle. Or is it Ginger Snaps? I can never remember. Hi, Ginger. All right. Chapter 2. Crossing. Oh, I got to put the right glasses on for this, don't I? I have a little rail here underneath my shelf that I hang all my glasses on. Okay. Little House on the Prairie, Chapter 2, Crossing the Creek. Pet and Patty began to trot briskly as if they were glad too. Laura held tight to the wagon bow and stood up in the jolting wagon. Beyond Pa's shoulder and far across the waves of green grass, she could see the trees, and they were not like any trees she had seen before. They were no taller than bushes. Whoa, Pa said suddenly. Now which way? He muttered to himself. The road divided here, and you could not tell which was the more traveled way. Both of them were faint wheel tracks in the grass. One went toward the west, and the other sloped down a little towards the south, but soon vanished in the tall blowing grass. Better go downhill, I guess, Pa decided. The creeks down in the bottoms must be this way to the ford. He turned Pet and Patty towards the south. The road went down and up and down and up again over gently curving land. The trees were nearer now, but they were no taller. Then Laura gasped and clutched the wagon bow, for almost under Pet and Patty's noses there was no more blowing grass. There was no land at all. She looked beyond the edge of the land and across the tops of the trees. The road turned there. For a little way, it went along the cliff's top, and then it went sharply downward. Pa put on the brakes. Pet and Patty braced themselves backwards and almost sat down. The wagon wheels slid onward, little by little, lowering the wagon farther down the deep slope into the ground. Jagged cliffs of bare red earth rose up on both sides of the wagon. Grass waved along their tops, but nothing grew on their seamed straight up and down sides. They were hot, and heat came from them against Laura's face. The wind was still blowing overhead, but it did not blow down in this deep crack in the ground. The stillness seemed strange and empty. Then once more the wagon was level. The narrow crack down which had come opened onto the The narrow crack down which had come opened into the bottomlands. Here grew the tall trees whose tops Laura had seen from the prairie above. Shady groves were scattered on the rolling meadows, and in the groves deer were lying down, hardly to be seen among the shadows. The deer turned their heads towards the wagon, and curious fawns stood up to see it more clearly. Laura was surprised because she did not see the creek, but the bottomlands were wide. Down here, below the prairie, there were gentle hills and open sunny spaces. The air was still and hot. Under the wagon wheels, the ground was soft. In the sunny open spaces, the grass grew thin and the deer had cropped it short. For a while, the high bare cliffs of red earth stood up behind the wagon, but they were almost hidden behind the hills and the trees when Pet and Patty stopped to drink from the creek. The rushing sound of water filled the still air. All along the creek banks, the trees hung over it and made it dark with shadows. In the middle, it ran swiftly, sparkling silver and blue. "This creek's pretty high," Pa said, "but I guess we can make it all right. You can see this is a ford by the old wheel ruts. What do you say, Caroline?" "Whatever you say, Charles," Ma answered. Pet and Patty lifted their wet noses. They pricked their ears forward, looking at the creek. Then they pricked them backward to hear what Pa would say. They sighed and laid their soft noses together to whisper to each other. A little way upstream, Jack was lapping the water with his red tongue. "I'll tie down the wagon cover," Pa said. He climbed down from the seat, unrolled the canvas sides, and tied them firmly to the wagon box. Then he pulled the rope at the back so that the canvas puckered together in the middle, leaving only a thin round hole too small to see through. Mary huddled down on the bed. She did not like fords. She was afraid of the rushing water, but Laura was excited. She liked the splashing. Pa climbed to the seat and saying, they may have to swim out there in the middle, but we'll make it all right, Caroline. Laura thought of Jack and said, "I wish Jack could ride in the wagon, Pa." Pa did not answer. Excuse me. He gathered the reins tightly in his hands. Ma said, Jack can swim, Laura. He'll be all right. The wagon went forward softly in the mud. Water began to splash against the wheels. The splashing grew louder. The wagon shook as the noisy water struck at it. Then all at once, the wagon lifted and balanced and swayed. It was a lovely feeling. The noise stopped and Ma said sharply, Lie down, girls. Excuse me. Lie down, girls. Quick as a flash, Mary and Laura dropped flat on the bed. When Ma spoke like that, they did as they were told. Ma's arm pulled a smothering blanket over them, heads and all. Be still just as you are. Don't move, she said. Mary did not move. She was trembling still. But Laura could not help wriggling a little bit. She did not want to see what was happening. She could feel the wagon swaying and turning, and the splashing was noisy again. And again it died away. Then Pa's voice frightened Laura. It said, Take them, Carolyn. The wagon lurched. There was a sudden heavy splash beside it. Laura sat straight up and clawed the blanket from her head. Pa was gone. Ma sat alone, holding tight to the reins with both hands. Mary hid her face in the blanket again, but Laura rose up further. She couldn't see the bank. She couldn't see anything in front of the wagon but water rushing at it. And in the water, 3 heads. Pet's head and Patty's head, and Pa's small wet head. Pa's fist in the water was holding tight to Pet's bridle. Laura could faintly hear Pa's voice through the rushing of the water. It sounded calm and cheerful, but she couldn't hear what he said. He was talking to the horses. Ma's face was white and scared. Lie down, Laura, Ma said. Laura lay down. She felt cold and sick. Her eyes were shut tight, but she could still see the terrible water and Pa's brown beard drowning in it. For a long, long time the wagon swayed and swung, and Mary cried without making a sound. Laura's stomach felt sicker and sicker. Then the front wheel struck, grated, and Pa shouted. The whole wagon jerked and jolted and tipped backward, but the wheels were turning on the ground. Laura was up again, holding to the seat. She saw Pet and Patty's scrambling wet backs climbing a steep bank, and Pa running beside them shouting, Hi, Petty! Hi, Pet! Get up! Get up! Whoopsie daisies! Good girls! At the top of the bank they stood still, panting and dripping, and the wagon stood still, safely out of that creek. Pa stood panting and dripping too, and Ma said, Oh, Charles. There, Caroline, Pa said. We're all safe thanks to a good tight wagon box and well fastened to the running gear. I never saw a creek rise so fast in my life. Pet and Patty are good swimmers, but I guess they wouldn't have made it if I hadn't helped them. If Pa had not known what to do, or if Ma had been too frightened to drive, or if Laura and Mary had been naughty and bothered her, then they would have all been lost. The river would have rolled them over and over and carried them away and drowned them, and nobody would have ever known what became of them for weeks. Perhaps no other person would come along that road. Well, Pa said, all's well that ends well, and Ma said, Charles, you're wet to the skin. Before Pa could answer, Laura cried, Where's Jack? They had forgotten Jack. They had left him on the other side of that dreadful water, and now they could not see him anywhere. He must have tried to swim after them, but they could not see him struggling in the water now. Laura swallowed hard to keep from crying. She knew it was shameful to cry, but there was crying inside her. All the long way from Wisconsin, poor Jack had followed them so patiently and faithfully, and now they had left him to drown. He was so tired, and they might have taken him into the wagon. He had stood on the bank and seen the wagon going away from him as if they didn't care for him at all, and he would never know how much they wanted him. Pa said he wouldn't have done such a thing to Jack, not for $1,000,000. If he had known how that creek would rise when they were in midstream, he would never have let Jack try to swim it. But that can't be helped now, he said. He went far up and down the creek bank looking for Jack, calling him and whistling for him. It was no use. Jack was gone. At last there was nothing to do but go on. Pet and Patty were rested. Pa's clothes had dried on him while he searched for Jack. He took the reins again and drove uphill out of the river bottoms. Laura looked back all the way. She knew she wouldn't see Jack again, but she wanted to. She didn't see anything but low curves of land coming between the wagon and the creek, and beyond the creek those strange cliffs of red earth rose up again. Then other bluffs just like them stood up in the front of the wagon. Faint wheel tracks went into a crack between those earthen walls. Pet and Patty climbed till the crack became a small grassy valley, and the valley widened out to the high prairie once more. No road, not even the faintest trace of wheels or of a rider's passing, could be seen anywhere. That prairie looked as if no human eye had ever seen it before. Only the tall wild grass covered the endless prairie land, and a great empty sky arched over it. Far away, the sun's edge touched the rim of the earth. The sun was enormous, and it was throbbing and pulsing with light. All around the sky's edge ran a pale pink glow, and above the pink was yellow, and above that blue. Above the blue sky was no color at all. Purple shadows were gathering over the land, and the wind was mourning. Pa stopped the Mustangs. He and Ma got out of the wagon to make camp, and Mary and Laura climbed down to the ground too. "Oh, Ma," Laura begged, "Jack has gone to heaven, hasn't he? He was such a good dog. Can't he go to heaven?" Ma did not know what to answer, but Pa said, "Yes, Laura, he can. God that doesn't forget sparrows won't leave a good dog like Jack out in the cold." Laura felt only a little better. She was not happy. Pa did not whistle about his work, as usual, and after a while he said, "And what we'll do in a wild country without a good watchdog, I don't know." Okay. Let's talk for a minute. Do you notice how Laura thinks? I gotta switch my glasses. Do you know how Laura thinks that? Notice how she said that crying is shameful? And yet, Mary, her older sister, was crying in the wagon while Laura was just like feeling sick inside, right? Human is selfish. Well, we know for a fact that Jack didn't even exist. Okay? Jack was actually their dog named Wolf. So the rest of that is kind of all made up. But there's another thing. If they're going west to Indian Territory, why didn't he go take the western road instead of going down into the creek bottoms and fording? Right? And they say the river rose really fast, but when the sky has been blue for days, maybe something farther up had rained and flooded the creek. But I mean, seriously, he should have seen, right? Yeah, and you can't judge. Yeah, and you can't judge dogs today by today's standards, right? I mean, my dog sleeps in my bed, okay, or Howie's bed, depending on who wants her the most that night. You cannot judge the past by today's standards. And did you notice when Mom spoke in a certain tone, which was rare? Those girls did as they were told, right? Shall we read Chapter 3. We don't want to leave sad Jack out in the cold, right? Little House on the Prairie, Chapter 3. Camp on the high prairie. Pa made camp as usual. First, he unhitched and unharnessed Pet and Patty, and he put them on their picket lines. Picket lines were long ropes fastened to iron pegs driven into the ground. The pegs were called picket pins. When horses were on picket pins, they could eat all the grass that the long ropes would let them reach. But when Pet and Patty were put on them, the first thing they did was lie down and roll back and forth all over. They rolled till the feeling of the harness was gone from their backs. It reminds me when I scratch my back, when I take my bra off at night, I scratch against the door jamb of my closet to scratch my back. While Pet and Patty were rolling, Pa pulled all the grass from a large, round space of ground. There was old dead grass at the root, and Pa would take no chance of setting the prairie on fire. If fire once started in that dry undergrass, it would sweep that whole country bare and black. Pa said, best be on the safe side. It saves trouble in the end. When the space was clear of grass, Pa laid a handful of dry grass in its center. From the creek bottoms, he brought an armful of twigs and dead wood. He laid small twigs and larger twigs and then the wood on a handful of dry grass, and he lighted the grass. The fire crackled merrily inside the ring of bare ground that it couldn't get out of. Then Pa brought water from the creek while Mary and Laura helped Ma get supper. Ma measured coffee beans into the coffee mill and Mary ground them. Laura filled the coffee pot with water that Pa brought, and Ma set the pot on the coals. She set the iron bake oven in the coals too. While it heated, she mixed cornmeal and salt with water and patted it into little cakes. She greased the bake oven with a pork rind, laid the cornmeal cakes in it, and put on its iron cover. Then Pa raked more coals over the cover while Ma sliced fat salt pork. She fried the slices in the iron spider. The spider had short legs to stand on in the coals, and that's why it was called a spider. If it had no legs, it would have been only a frying pan. The coffee boiled and the cakes baked and the meat fried, and they all smelled so good that Laura grew hungrier and hungrier. Pa set the wagon seat near the fire. He and Ma sat on it. Mary and Laura sat on the wagon tongue. Each of them had a tin plate and a steel knife and a steel fork with white bone handles. Ma had a tin cup and Pa had a tin cup, and baby Carrie had a little one all her own, but Mary and Laura had to share their tin cup. They drank water. They could not drink coffee until they grew up. While they were eating supper, the purple shadows closed around the campfire. The vast prairie was dark and still. Only the wind moved stealthily through the grass, and the large low stars hung glittering from the great sky. The campfire was cozy in the big chill darkness. The slices of pork were crisp and fat. The corn cakes were good. In the dark beyond the wagon, Pet and Patty were eating too. They bit off bites of grass with sharp crunching sounds. We'll camp here a day or two, Pa said. Maybe we'll stay here. There's good land, timber in the bottoms, plenty of game, everything a man could want. What do you say, Caroline? We might go farther and fare worse, Ma replied. Anyway, I'll look around tomorrow, Pa said. I'll take my gun and get us some good fresh meat. He lighted his pipe with a hot coal and stretched out his legs comfortably. The warm brown smell of tobacco smoke mixed with the warmth of the fire. Mary yawned and slid off the wagon tongue to sit on the grass. Laura yawned too. Ma quickly washed the tin plates and the tin cups, the knives and forks. She washed the bake oven and the spider and rinsed the dishcloth. For an instant she was still, listening to the long wailing howl from the dark prairie. They all knew what it was, but that sound always ran cold up Laura's backbone and crinkled over the back of her head. Ma shook out the dishcloth, and then she walked into the dark and spread the cloth on the tall grass to dry. When she came back, Pa said, "Wolves 1/2 mile away, I'd judge." "Well, where there's deer, there will be wolves. I wish." He didn't say what he wished, but Laura knew. He wished Jack was there. When wolves howled in the big woods, Laura had always known that Jack would not let them hurt her. A lump swelled hard in her throat and her nose smarted. She winked fast and did not cry. That wolf, or perhaps another wolf, howled again. "Bedtime for little girls," said Ma cheerfully. Mary got up and turned around so that Ma could unbutton her. But Laura jumped up and stood still. She saw something. Deep in the dark, beyond the fire, 2 green lights were shining near the ground. They were eyes. Cold ran up Laura's backbone. Her scalp crinkled, her hair stood up. The green lights moved. One winked out, then the other one winked out, then both shone steadily, coming nearer. Very rapidly they were coming nearer. "Look, Pa, look," Laura said. "A wolf!" Pa did not seem to move quickly, but he did. In an instant, he took his gun out of the wagon and was ready to fire at those green eyes. The eyes stopped coming. They were still in the dark, looking at him. Can you see that? "It can't be a wolf unless it's a mad wolf," Pa said. Ma lifted Mary into the wagon. "And it's not that," Pa said. "Listen to the horses. Pet and Patty were still biting off bits of grass." "A lynx," Ma said. "Or a coyote?" Pa picked up a stick of wood and shouted and threw it. The green eyes went close to the ground as if the animal crouched to spring. Pa held the gun ready. The creature did not move. "Don't, Charles," Ma said, but Pa slowly walked towards those eyes. And slowly along the ground the eyes crawled towards him. Laura could see the animal in the edge of the dark. It was a tawny animal and brindled. Then Pa shouted and Laura screamed. The next thing she knew, she was trying to hug a jumping, panting, wriggling Jack who lapped her face and hands with his warm, wet tongue. She couldn't hold him. He leaped and wriggled from her to Pa to Ma and back to her again. "Well, I'm beat," said Pa. "So am I," said Ma, "but did you have to wake the baby?" She rocked Carrie in her arms, hushing her. Jack was perfectly well, but soon he lay down close to Laura and sighed a long sigh. His eyes were red with tiredness, and all under part of him was caked with mud. Ma gave him a cornmeal cake, and he licked it and wagged politely, but he could not eat. He was too tired. No telling how long he kept swimming," Pa said, "nor how far he was carried downstream before he landed. And when at last he reached them, Laura had called him a wolf and Pa had threatened to shoot him. But Jack knew they didn't mean it. Laura asked him, "You knew we didn't mean it, didn't you, Jack?" Jack wagged his stump of a tail. He knew. It was past bedtime. Laura chained Pet and Patty to the feed box at the back of the wagon and fed them their corn. Notice that he puts them on picket ropes, but when he puts them on the wagon for the night, like to the wagon box, the feed box, he chains them and fed them their corn. Carrie slept again, and Ma helped Mary and Laura undress. She put their long nightgowns on over their heads while they stuck their arms into the sleeves. They buttoned the neckbands themselves and tied the strings of their nightcaps beneath their chins. Under the wagon, Jack wearily turned around 3 times and lay down to sleep. In the wagon, Mary had said their prayers and crawled into their little bed. Ma kissed them good night. On the other side of the canvas, Pet and Patty were eating their corn. When Patty whooshed into the feed box, the whoosh was right at Laura's ear. There were little scurrying sounds in the grass. In the trees by the creek, an owl called, "Hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo." Farther away, another owl answered, "Woo-hoo, woo-hoo." Far away on the prairie, the wolves howled, "Ow!" And under the wagon, Jack growled low in his chest. In the wagon, everything was safe and snug. Thickly in front of the open wagon top hung the large glittering stars. Pa could reach them, Laura thought. She wished he would pick up the largest one from the thread on which it hung from the sky and give it to her. She was wide awake. She was not sleepy at all. But suddenly she was very much surprised. The large star winked at her. Then she was waking up the next morning. Now, I think Jack, the brindle bulldog, was just the kind of dog Laura wanted. And that's what she put into the story. Because their dog Wolf was left behind in the big woods of Wisconsin, right? We still go to Mass and have big meal afterwards. My kids would never let me stop until Jack came back, of course. Of course, right? Absolutely. So, the next couple of chapters are Prairie Day and, working on the house and getting all that stuff together. All right. Does Laura have a panther or is it fake? Does Laura have a panther? I don't know. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure. My poodle turns 3 times too. First poodle I've had that does that. No, Gracie takes sometimes sometimes she'll go up 5, 6, 7 turns. But that's an actual trait in purebreds that shows that their bloodlines are pretty close. It's an anomaly, right? One day I want a big fluffy mutt. Oh, I'm done with big dogs. Gracie's the biggest dog I'll ever have again. She, until we got a pug, our big boxer, Emma, was the smallest dog we'd ever had. We used to have things like lab shepherd crosses and you know what I mean? Great big dogs. So she was a cat. Who was a cat? Panther in the Woods story. Well, yeah, they had panthers. Of course they did. Some people call them mountain lions. Some people call them there's lynxes and there's, black. There were black panthers back then in the big woods. Just if you think about it this way, every day, thousands of species of animal fall off the face of the earth. They go on to the extinction or near extinction list. Okay? I mean, all these things we hear about, they actually lived. Oh, I'd love a pit bull, but I mean, I have to be able to take my dog if we travel anywhere. I have to be able to get her shots and take her with us, and there's a lot of places that will not allow pit bulls. So I can't have one. And it's that simple. A Staffordshire Terrier. Those are the original pit bulls. Staffordshire Terrier is the first bloodlines of the pit bulls. And I think what they did was they crossed them with a boxer or a more of a taller dog. So there was a story about either Pa or Grandpa being chased by a panther. That was in Little House in the Big Woods, I believe. Yeah, I was pretty sure it was Little House in the Big Woods. Yeah, not every place allows pit bulls. Therefore, I wouldn't be able to travel, right? And I am no longer, one of the reasons why we only have one dog as well. Gracie won't let us have another dog. We don't have any cats or fish or birds. I used to have cockatiels and everything, finches and cockatiels. Is because we're planning on traveling sometimes in when we retire. Like, for instance, we're going away to Beavermead Park in Peterborough in July for a week, if everything's kosher then. And we are, we take Gracie with us. We take Gracie with us because when we would say go to Arizona or go to Florida or whatever, it took me having my animals, even if it was just my dog. Someone had to house sit and look after my dog. No, she goes with us, right? No, anything here. There's places here like in Ottawa, for instance. Caesar Milan was going to come to Ottawa, and they wouldn't let him bring his pit bull, his personal dog that even helps him train other dogs and stuff. And he said, "Fuck you, I'm not coming." Pardon my language. He said, "No, I'm not coming there. If you're not going to let me bring my dog, I won't come." Thanks, rule makers. They tried to do that with German pincers and Rottweilers, but they finally succeeded with pit bulls. Excuse me. I wasn't medicating. I had an itch in my nose I had to deal with. We have breed restrictions where I live. Nothing that is protective. I'm in an apartment. I mean, my problem is we make all these rules for idiots, right? If people didn't breed and dog fight, pit bulls wouldn't be a problem. Pit bulls, when properly trained, are one of the gentlest, most loving dogs on the face of the earth. So are Doberman Pinschers and German Shepherds and Rottweilers. It's all in how they're raised. But there's idiots out there that breed dogs for fighting. And I just hope I never meet someone who breeds dogs for fighting. Because, man, right? You know what I mean? So you can't idiot-proof they're trying to idiot-proof the world. Ooh, you gotta get flu shots. You gotta get vaccines. You gotta stay home. You gotta wear 3-layer masks and all this stuff. And I'm not arguing, right? I wear a mask when I go out to the store. Okay? When I go into a store, I respect the rules and the requests. But I'm not drinking all the Kool-Aid on this. Just saying. Well, Gracie has been a very aggressive dog. She has been shown quite a bit of aggression, right? And that's not necessarily a boxer trait. Boxers are big babies. But guess what? Gracie has a couple of odd traits that makes me think that the person we bought her off was doing some inline breeding. Just saying. That was bred for fighting, 6 months old, and he was so scared. Poor baby. Poor baby. So, I mean, but Gracie now understands, but she's still very protective. She behaves more like a pit bull would when it comes to being protective, but she's a boxer. So, I mean, it's not the dog. It's not the breed. It's the idiots who get them. If you live in a city, don't get a working dog, right? Don't get, get a Doberman Pinscher. They love laying around and eating donuts. So do Great Danes. Great Danes are great apartment dogs, okay? But you don't live in an apartment and have a German Shepherd or a Rottweiler, right? Because they have a very small space and they are territorial. You don't live in the city and get a coon hound or a beagle or a bloodhound. Why? Because they're a border collie, or or any kind of sheep herding dog, or Great Pyrenees, or Huskies. Why? They're working dogs. And if you live in the city, unless you want to take that dog for multiple walks a day and exercise it multiple times a day, throwing the ball, throwing the ball, throwing the ball. You know why? They need to work. It's in their genetic makeup, right? So, I mean, people really need to be educated about breeds before they start getting them and deciding to live with them in the city or the country or otherwise, right? My little Maltese as a little what? Mississippi Leghound? I'm scared of dobies. They're beautiful, but I'm afraid. When I was a kid, my mom was watching a movie where a man was trapped in a store warehouse that was protected by Dobermans. See, Dobermans are another, like, they have been made, they can be trained to be attack dogs. They are a guard dog. That's their makeup. So are German Shepherds. So are Rottweilers. So are Pit Bulls. If you train them that way, if you don't train them, my cousin Charlene, well, she's my cousin, but she actually married my cousin. She had a Doberman called Dobie. And if she came home from a meeting or visiting with friends or work or anything like that, and she had a Tim Hortons cup in her hand, but not a donut for him, he would prostrate himself on the couch and cry, "Where's my donut? Oh my God." He had to sleep with her, okay? No different than Gracie. I've never met a Doberman pincer that I didn't love. Big babies. But yeah, Gracie's more. I think she's got pit bull in her somewhere. I think that's one of the reasons she's so small. Right? I think somewhere in her makeup there's pit bull. Right? And you don't cross pit bulls. You don't cross pit bulls with labs, because then you're taking a hunting, bird retrieving dog with a guard dog, and it's a really bad mix. Right? So folks, I'm just saying, people need to educate themselves about the breeds they're going to get. For instance, the day that Gracie passes away beyond this realm to wait for us at the Rainbow Bridge, our last set of dogs is going to be either a pair of small Terrier sisters or a pair of Chihuahua sisters. That's it. And I'm getting them from the same litter so that they can grow up together. I'm not going to try and force. The fact between Gracie and Frankie just didn't really like each other all that much as they got older, right? My Bengal has a huge vocabulary and talks to me. Well, Gracie has a really huge understanding vocabulary. Like, she talks, right? And Howie, does not listen to her, right? She talks with body language, right? I'll be sitting, I'll go, okay, everything's done. Like, when I get into my power lift chair, then I'm done for the day, right? When I'm in my power lift chair, I'm done for the day. And I sit down and I look around, make sure I've got my tea, I've got my medication, I've got my phone, and I sit. And every time, like, I'll put Gracie up, but about an hour later or so, she'll come up and she'll look at Howie on the couch. She'll stand right in front of him. And he'll say, "What?" I said, "Howie, she's got to go out." He said, "You just put her out." I said, "Well, obviously, she needs to go number 2 or something." And he goes, "Well, she can wait. Get up on the couch." And it's like, no, Howie. When a dog gives you a clear signal and you ignore it, they stop talking to you because it's not working. So I am the dog trainer in the house. My Chinese crested and Yorkies get along great. Oh, that's great. Okay, no, I'm not doing another chapter today, Willie. That's going to be Little House Live, day 26, next Saturday, 4 p.m. I've heard Boston's can tip forward. Well, it depends. But I'm not, I had two of them once and no. Right. Anyway, this is Beverly for Reading with Beverly. Sorry for getting off topic. It was pretty much all about dogs today. Saying we'll see you next week at 4 o'clock for Little House Live, day 26. All right. I love you guys. Mwah. Take care. God bless and have a great day. Have a great weekend.